At my dad's birthday bash, my name tag didn't just have my name on it, it said, The Disappointment. My stepmom, Brenda, got a real kick out of it. Honestly, I guess it wasn't wrong. I stood up, tapped my glass with a spoon, and said loud enough for the whole room, I'd like to make a toast to the last time any of y'all will ever see me. Dad almost choked on his drink. But the real kicker? I actually followed through. I walked straight out the door and left one final memory behind. I'm 29 years old, woman, and if you ask my dad about me, he'd probably tell you, without missing a beat, that I'm the biggest letdown he's ever known. And it's not because I'm some criminal, or because I'm unemployed, or even because I've done anything bad. No, it's because I chose to live my own life instead of playing by the rules he laid out for me. See, my dad, Robert, he's the kind of guy who needs everything to go his way. He's all about control, appearances, and loyalty to the family, but only when that loyalty benefits him. When my folks split up, I was just 11 years old. It wasn't one of those nasty divorces, at least not on the outside. But Dad didn't waste any time moving on. Within a year, he married Brenda, a woman who already had 2 kids from her last marriage, Dylan and Megan. And that's when the ground kinda shifted under my feet. At first, I gave it my best shot. I was just a kid, I wanted my dad to be happy. Brenda, she was real sweet, in that over-the-top, fake kind of way. In public, she put on a whole show, hugging me too tight and chirping things like, I just know we're gonna be best friends. But when nobody was looking, it was obvious her main focus was her own 2 kids. Dad, who used to be all about me, suddenly had a new crew to care about. Little stuff started slipping at first. He'd miss my soccer games without a second thought, but somehow he never missed Dylan's. He'd forget to pick me up from school but was always front row at Megan's dance recitals. And then it got worse. By the time I hit 15, I was more like the unpaid babysitter. I was expected to watch Dylan and Megan, clean up after them, and act like the perfect big sister while they got away with murder. If I ever said a word about it, Dad would just let out this long, tired sigh like I was the biggest burden in the world. He'd say stuff like, they need more attention, you're older, be mature. Brenda didn't bother sugarcoating it, she'd just flat out call me selfish. The final nail in the coffin? Dad drained the savings account my mom had built up for me, money meant for my college tuition. Mom fought like hell in court to get that money back, but honestly, the damage was already done. I was furious. I barely talked to Dad my last year of high school. When I finally left for college, which I paid for myself, I only showed up for the occasional Thanksgiving or Christmas. Over the years, things between us never really healed. Sure, I'd still get invites to family get-togethers, but they always felt more like an afterthought, like they were just checking a box. I could tell what they really thought. To them, I was the difficult one who didn't want to pretend everything was perfect. Meanwhile, Dylan and Megan? They could do no wrong, the golden kids. Which brings us back to Dad's big birthday bash. Brenda went all out, rented a hall, sent invites to half the town, threw one of those parties where you invite people you barely even know. I wasn't planning on going, honestly. But my aunt, one of the few people still firmly in my corner, talked me into it. Just swing by for a little bit, she said. Maybe it's different now. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. The second I walked through the door, I felt it. That cold, awkward tension settled on me like a heavy coat. There were folks there I hadn't seen in years, but instead of hugs or smiles, I got a bunch of polite head nods. The conversations just flowed around me like I wasn't even there. I spotted Dad across the room, cracking up with some old buddies. When he saw me, his grin flickered, just for a second, like he couldn't believe I actually showed up. I was already second-guessing my decision when I caught sight of the little table by the entrance. Name tags. Brenda loved this kind of thing at her parties, said it helped people mingle. Most of the tags were normal. Uncle Larry, Cousin Katie, Neighbor Mike. And then I saw mine, and my Mike each dropped. I picked it up, stared at it, not sure I was seeing right. Across the room, I caught that familiar laugh. Brenda. There she was, wine glass in hand, watching me like a cat with a canary. That smug, little smirk playing on her face. I clenched the tag in my hand so hard my fingers ached. This wasn't gonna play out the way she thought it would. I stood there for a moment, breathing through the red-hot anger bubbling up. My brain needed a second to catch up with what I was seeing. There was my name, sure. But underneath it, in smaller letters, someone had scribbled, The Disappointment. At first, I thought maybe it was some sick joke. Maybe one of my cousins trying to be funny. Maybe a mistake. But then I heard that laugh again, Brenda's laugh. And when I looked up, there she was, leaning on the bar, sipping her wine without a care in the world. Our eyes locked, and that smug little smile of hers just grew. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. People around me had started to notice, glancing my way, shifting awkwardly, but nobody said a word. I could feel it though, the pressure in the air. Don't make a scene. That's what they all were thinking. I took a deep breath and set the name tag back down. Smoothed it out, made sure it lined up perfectly with the others. For a brief moment, I almost laughed out loud. Of course Brenda would pull something like this. Classic Brenda. It wasn't an outright slap in the face. It wasn't bold enough that anyone would immediately call her out. No, it was just sneaky enough that if I reacted, I'd look like the one causing trouble. Honestly, I should have seen it coming the second I walked through that door. A hand touched my shoulder, and when I turned, it was my aunt, the only person in that whole mess of a family who had ever truly understood me. Her eyebrows were pulled tight, and her mouth was pressed into a firm, unhappy line. She'd seen the name tag. I caught her eyes flick over toward Brenda. "You all right?" she asked in a low voice. I gave her a tight smile and said, "Yeah, I'm fine." But that was a lie. I was anything but fine. I was tired in a way I couldn't even begin to put into words. Because this wasn't new. This wasn't even the worst thing Brenda had ever pulled. It was just one more stunt in a long, ugly line of reminders about where I stood. I should have turned around and walked right back out. Should have left them to their little party. But something deep inside me snapped awake. Not this time. So instead, I took a deep breath, straightened up, and decided to do something that would catch them completely off guard. I smiled. A real easygoing, nothing's wrong kind of smile. Then I plucked a glass of champagne from a passing server's tray, gave the rim a light tap with my nail, and turned to face the room. If Brenda wanted a show, I'd be more than happy to give her one. I lifted my glass just a little, enough to catch the attention of a few people nearby. The weight of the room shifted a little, I could feel it. A few glances flicked my way. I hadn't caused a scene yet. Not really. But the soft clink of my nail against the glass had pulled just enough ice toward me. Just enough to make Brenda falter, ever so slightly, before she masked it with another slow sip of her wine. Her eyes narrowed, like she was trying to figure out what I was planning. I let the tension stretch out a few seconds longer than it needed to, as if I was about to make a speech. Then at the last second, I gave a little shake of my head and turned away, heading deeper into the crowd. I wasn't gonna give her the satisfaction. Not yet. The party itself was everything I expected it to be, packed, way too polished, with fancy food and decorations that looked like they were ripped straight from a magazine. Brenda had pulled out all the stops as usual. Because for her it was never really about celebrating Dad's birthday, it was about putting on a performance. Making sure everyone saw how perfect her world was. How much she and Dad were adored. How successful their children had turned out to be. Their children. Not me. Dylan and Megan were right in the center of everything, of course. Megan was surrounded by a bunch of family, holding court like some kind of princess, gushing about her upcoming wedding. And of course Dad's footing the bill, she was saying, flashing that oversized diamond ring like it was a trophy. We just wanted something elegant, you know? Not one of those tacky Pinterest weddings. I almost laughed out loud. Megan had always been like that, polished to the point of being fake, just the right amount of self-centered to keep everyone orbiting around her without making it too obvious. Dylan wasn't much better. He was leaning against the bar, soaking up congratulations from some of Dad's old friends about his shiny new job, a job I was sure he hadn't earned a bit of. Dylan never had to lift a finger for anything. Every opportunity he had was handed to him on a silver platter. Every screw-up he made, quietly cleaned up by Dad. For a second I was tempted to stroll over and crash the little love fest, just to see the panic in their eyes. But before I could move, I heard Dad's voice behind me. "Ah," he said, and when I turned around, he was already heading toward me with a drink in his hand and that tight, neutral look on his face. "Didn't think you'd make it." I smiled, not a real one, and said, "Wouldn't miss it." He gave a small nod, glancing around the room like he couldn't wait to look anywhere but at me. "You've been keeping busy, I hear," he said, casual, like he was trying hard not to actually ask me anything real. "Same old dance." I nodded. "Yeah. Work's been good. I bought a house last year." His eyebrows lifted a little. "A house?" he repeated. "Yep," I said, keeping my tone light. He sipped his drink, not pushing for more. That was the thing about my dad, he hated when I accomplished anything on my own. Every time I did something without his help, it chipped a little piece off the story he liked to tell about me, the one where I was lost, selfish, and couldn't get my act together. He didn't like that story falling apart. He liked being able to shake his head in pity when people asked about me, liked having an excuse for why I wasn't around much. I could see him searching, looking for some small jab to make. But before he could come up with one, Brenda swooped in like a vulture. "Well," she said, stepping up beside him, her smile all shiny and fake, "at least she finally did something responsible." And just like that, I felt the heat rise under my skin again. I turned to face her, and she was beaming, practically glowing like she was just thrilled to see me. But I knew better. I knew that look. Brenda was a master at delivering insults wrapped in compliments. And if you dared call her out, you were the one being too sensitive. I should have walked away. I should have let it roll off my back. But I didn't. Because something about this whole night, the name tag, Dad brushing me off, the sea of strangers pretending they were my family, it all rubbed raw against something inside me. Something that had been building for a long, long time. Whatever it was inside me that night, it snapped for good. I turned toward Brenda, tilting my head just a little, and said, light as a feather, "You know I was gonna let it slide. But now I gotta ask, who came up with the name tag?" For just a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Real quick. Almost too quick to catch. Then she laughed and tossed her hair back like it was nothing. "Oh, come on," she said, laughing like we were old friends. "You always take everything way too personally. It was just a joke." I nodded, playing along. "Right. Hilarious." She shrugged and sipped her wine, acting like it was no big deal. "You know," she said, "if you spent less time being mad all the time, maybe you'd be." I held up a finger, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Actually," I said, calm and steady, "I think you're onto something." Her eyes narrowed just a little. "About what?" "About making a joke," I said, shifting slightly and lifting my glass higher. "'Cause now that I think about it, I got a joke too." Brenda blinked, caught off guard, and for the first time that evening, my dad shifted beside her, clearly uncomfortable. And that's when I smiled, slow, easy, the kind of smile that says you're about to watch the house burn down and you're totally fine with it. "I'd like to make a toast," I said. The buzz of conversation around the room started dying down, not all at once, but you could feel it. People turned curious. Because folks love a toast, especially one they didn't see coming. Next to me, I felt Dad tense up, and Brenda let out this weird little laugh, shifting on her heels like she was trying to shake it off. "Oh, come on," she said, waving a hand. "You don't have to." I lifted my hand too, but mine was a lot calmer. "No, really. I insist." The whole room seemed to lean in, little ripples of whispering and chuckles running through the crowd. Some people even grabbed their drinks, ready to enjoy what they thought was gonna be some sweet, light-hearted little speech. They had no clue what was coming for them. Brenda's smile stayed glued to her face, but it was tighter now, just barely hanging on. She was still clinging to the version of me she thought she knew, the one who'd take the hits, fake a laugh, and move on without a fight. Dad, though? He wasn't fooled. He tightened his grip on his drink, and for the first time all night, he actually looked at me, not past me, not through me, but right at me. I let the silence stretch just a second longer, letting the weight of it sink into everyone's bones. Then I raised my glass high. "To my father," I said, voice easy, almost cheerful. "And to Brenda, of course." A few chuckles floated through the crowd, nervous ones, people still thinking this was all a bit of fun. "Because without them," I went on, "I don't think I would have learned one of the most important lessons of my life." I paused and took a slow, measured sip of champagne. Across from me, Brenda let out a short, breathy laugh, the kind that begged people to join in and defuse the tension. Some folks did, chuckling along, still assuming I was about to roast myself. I smiled wider. "No, really," I said. "I mean it. Sometimes the folks who challenge you the most, they're the ones who teach you what you really need to know." I turned my eyes straight on Dad. "You always said, Dad, that family's supposed to lift each other up. That we should celebrate one another's wins, be there for each other." I caught him swallow hard, the movement jerky, his hand clenching tighter around his drink. "And I used to believe that," I said. "I really did." The room was dead silent now, like the air had been sucked right out of it. Brenda's hand was wrapped around the stem of her wineglass so tight, I half expected it to snap clean in half. I gently set my own glass down on the nearest table, nice and careful. But somewhere along the line, I said, I learned something. I let the quiet stretch until it hummed in everyone's ears. I realized, I continued, that some people only support you when you're playing the role they picked for you. I watched Brenda's knuckles whiten even more. As long as you're what they want you to be, the golden child, the black sheep, whatever, they'll pat you on the back and say they love you. But the second you step out of that role, I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. That's when you find out how they really feel. A ripple moved through the crowd, people shuffling awkwardly, exchanging glances. I caught Megan staring at Dad, waiting for him to tell her how to react. Dylan, meanwhile, was smirking like this was the best entertainment he'd had all night. And Brenda? She was still smiling, but her hand was trembling just a little now. I used to think if I just worked harder, played by the rules, proved myself, you'd see me differently, I said, my voice softer now but still steady as a drumbeat. But I get it now. I saw Brenda open her mouth, maybe to jump in, maybe to shut me down. But I didn't give her the chance. I turned my full attention back to Dad. At the end of the day, I said, my voice steady as a stone, I was never supposed to succeed, was I? I saw his face flicker, just for a heartbeat. Just enough. I let the silence hold there, heavy and sharp, before exhaling slow and steady and rolling my shoulders back like I was finally putting down a load I'd been carrying for way too long. But I did it. I built something real. I made a life for myself that didn't have a thing to do with this family. And honestly, it's been the most peaceful, most satisfying thing I've ever done. I could see it in their faces, the confusion, the questions, the little flickers of doubt. They had no idea what I was really talking about. Because they'd spent so long believing the version of me that Brenda and my dad had carefully crafted over the years. Brenda let out another awkward little laugh, trying to pull the attention back her way. Oh, come on, she said, her voice all fake and bubbly. This is ridiculous. It's just a name tag. I turned to look right at her. You're right, I said, smooth as anything. It is just a name tag. I let that hang for a second. But it's also a pattern, I added. A lifetime of little moments just like this. The digs. The jokes. The ways they made sure I never forgot. No matter what I did, in their eyes I was always going to be the disappointment. Finally, my dad cleared his throat and stepped forward a bit. That's enough, he said, low and firm. I met his eyes head on. I agree, I said calmly. It is enough. Before anyone else could blink, I picked my glass back up. I raised it slightly, letting the weight of my next words settle heavy over the room. To the last time you'll ever see me. The silence that hit the room was like a slap. Dad stiffened like someone had sucker punched him. Brenda's mouth fell open for just a second before she snapped it shut tight. Somebody in the back muttered, wait, what? But I didn't give anyone time to stop me. I set my glass down on the table, turned on my heel, and started walking straight for the door. I could feel their eyes burning into my back. Feel the panic start bubbling up around the edges of the room. Because they knew, this wasn't like all the other times. I took one last look over my shoulder before stepping outside. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was running away from a fight. I was walking toward something, toward freedom, toward peace, toward the life I had been building without them for years. I stepped out into the cool night air and took a deep, steady breath, filling my lungs. It was over. I had finally cut the cord the way I should have a long time ago. No more pretending. No more chasing approval from people who only ever cared about me when I fit neatly into the little box they made for me. I drove home in silence that night, every mile peeling another layer of weight off my shoulders. Even when I sat in my quiet living room later, though, a small part of me wondered. Had I gone too far? Had I made a mistake? The next few days were a blur of missed calls and ignored texts. I stayed off social media. I didn't need to see the mess they were probably making out of it. Yeah, I had walked out on my dad's birthday party. Yeah, I had publicly humiliated him, and Brenda too, the woman who had spent years pushing me out in favor of her own perfect little world. The family group chat blew up, but I stayed silent. I didn't know if I could handle the fallout, not yet. Finally, my aunt, bless her heart, sent me a text. Are you okay? I stared at it for a while, not even sure what to say. Because I was okay, better than I'd been in years, but I was also still unsettled. I told her I needed some time. She didn't push. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Dad. Where are you? He asked in that familiar tone, the one that always made it sound like I had somehow let him down again. I'm at home, I said. And I'm not coming back. There was a long, loaded pause. You can't just walk away like this, he said eventually. This family, we have to stick together. I didn't even think about it. Not if sticking together means pretending to be someone I'm not, I said. Not anymore. That was the last conversation we ever had. Weeks went by. I stayed away from everything: weddings, birthday parties, whatever other events they tried to throw together. Most of the family either took Dad and Brenda's side or pretended like nothing ever happened. I heard through the grapevine that Dad was hurt. That Brenda was furious. That Dylan and Megan were disappointed in me for causing a scene. But you know what? It didn't bother me. I was living my life. I was still standing, still thriving. And while cutting them off wasn't easy, it brought me a peace I hadn't felt in years. I haven't spoken to any of them since that night. Not once. And now here I am, throwing it out to you, Reddit. Am I the a-hole for walking out the way I did? For making that toast? For cutting ties completely? Did I go too far? Or was this a long time coming? I know now I'll never get my dad's approval. I'll never be the daughter he wanted. And honestly, I'm finally starting to realize I don't need to be.